So the main reason I wanted to make a video about this particular album is not only because I consider this a great album that I don't see people talk about, but I have an interesting story behind it and how this album ended up getting into my hands. So basically back in 2016, almost 10 years ago at this point, which is crazy to think about, a friend of mine was into a phase with post-hardcore or mathcore and stuff like doom and stoner metal as well. And so he saw this album being tagged as a stoner metal or doom metal album, one of the two. It was from one of the biggest company chains in Greece, where people mostly get laptops, gaming PCs, TVs, smartphones and gadgets, stuff like that. But Public, which is this massive chain, also have book sections, it has movie sections and also CD and vinyl sections, which the vinyl section in particular was 3 times the size a decade ago. Now in Public you mostly get the standard pop and rap stuff of today, lots of classic rock, mainly mainstream stuff, but sometimes you can find some hidden gems like this one. I don't know how Undergroove, the label behind this album, was able to have this in their Public stores, but keep in mind because it's a massive chain, they most likely don't know what goes into their store. And so labeling this as just a stoner or a doom metal album does make sense, but it's not really the most accurate description. It's much more than just that, something that maybe was hard to describe, and so the tagging that this album had on its side was kind of misleading. So this friend, he impulsively buys the album out of one of the stores, not listening to it beforehand, just taking a risk based off the tags alone. Which okay, at the end of the day it's not like he got anything expensive, I believe it was a pretty cheap CD. So anyways, he puts the CD on, and not only was it not what he expected, he just closed it in the first 2 or 3 minutes. He's nope, what the fuck is this? He immediately gives it to my friend, he's it's yours, it's all yours. And my friend's opinion on this was pretty neutral. He tells me the story, he puts the CD on when we're together, and I'm blown away. For the time I wasn't that much adjusted to the more experimental side of metal as I am now, and so this ended up being a big surprise for just how wacky this whole thing felt. And so when it finished, I was can I get this? And he was sure, you seem to be the one enjoying it the most, so it won't go to waste. And this is how this album ended up in my hands past 2 more times before, and let me tell you, to this day, this remains one of the most intriguing metal records I've ever heard and have in my collection. And I don't know about music forums or teams, but I really haven't seen anyone talk about this album, on YouTube at least. I couldn't find a single video mentioning this album. And it's kind of interesting to have an album that has a story like this, that means something to you about this specific period of time. It's a way to appreciate the art for what it is, rather than rely on a popular opinion and the story behind the band. You just live for the moment. And while other videos might have some additional context that can be significant about an album's creation, in the case of the Sontaran Experiment, there's not really much to add. Apart from this self-titled album, it seems like they also have a CDR made a year prior to their debut studio work in a split with Stancock, which is a solo project from one of the band members. Other than the self-titled album over here, that's it. There is really nothing else. Some of the band members have been to other projects, but all of them seem pretty small as well. So yeah, an album that has flew completely off the radar with not that much information behind it, and it's not that it really needs it. So what is this aspect that was such a huge throw-off from the very first minutes? Well, the album decides to start with the 2.5 minute high-frequency guitar feedback section, peppered with some weird improvised synth passages, and a subtle heartbeat looping in the background. That doesn't seem like the way you would want an album to begin when you're expecting to listen to some doom metal. And it's not like it's just an intro. This is a section that goes for 2.5 minutes. And the first track is 23 minutes long. So because of this introduction, you can easily get the wrong impression. But it immediately transitions to a really heavy sludge metal section, which, yeah, you can say it has the melodic elements of like doom and stoner metal, but I think the most appropriate descriptor would be sludge metal, or even like drone metal is not that far-fetched. Like, these melodies are extremely slow and heavy. It still keeps some of the noise passages and the vocals come into play, which are pretty good. We get some very nice riffs that later get accompanied by some really cool atmospheric synths, and it's quite beautiful at times. But then it gets more harsh 7 minutes in with sporadic drum fills and noise segments. It mellows a bit, then gets harsh again, and then it has possibly the most standout sequence in the whole album. 40 minutes in, it abruptly cuts, you just hear the sound of a clock ticking. It goes on for a while, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a grindcore explosion is happening, ferocious blast beats and fuzzy guitar tones for just a couple of seconds. Abruptly cuts, the clock ticking is back again. Grindcore ferocity jump scares you a second time. Back to the clock, then the switch ups between the two get much faster. Then there's chaos, and it's back to the slower side of things, with the structure reoccurring from its previous heavy segment, or having some similar elements at least. And after all of that chaos, this track ends on a singular synth note. This massive first track, called The Dawning of the Black Summer, is phenomenal. Outside of the riffs being really memorable, this track really takes you by surprise. It is unpredictable, off-putting, and experiments with so many elements that do not simply come and go. They stay, and it's like they make a statement. This could easily work as an intense sludge metal track. But the electronic aspects and all of its curveballs are not just experimentations of the moment, they play a pivotal part to the whole song structure, and I really like how it takes me off guard, but is able to hook me up, wondering what's the next thing that's going to happen, without feeling overwhelmed by the whole thing or thinking, I would like a bit more of this. There is a great balance to all of those ideas taking place and having their space at the appropriate time. Truly one of the most spectacular, lengthy tracks that I can think of. Even if the next two tracks do not contain the insanity and experimentations of the first cut, they are still pretty compelling. Act 2, Desperate Times Call for Desperate Measures, starts with blast beat ferocity and tense screams, and half a minute in, it instantly slows down to a brutal, down-tuned mayhem of sludge metal with the best screams in the whole album. 5 minutes in, we instantly transition into jazzy grooves, kind of feels like an intro to a post-rock song, and once again the soothing section covers a big chunk of the 16-minute track. There is once again a blast beat jump scare, because of course there is, and then it's back to sludge metal and epic atmospheric synths. It ends with a bass and drums only segment and throws in a sudden blast beat on the last second, just for good measure. While Act 3, The Last Human Beings Alive, might feel like the most restrained and straightforward out of the three tracks, it still shows some excellent blending of harsh vocals with slow and powerful riffs, a production with a lot of punch to it, and some really welcoming additions of noise and electronics to enhance the experience. This track is quite relentless for its almost 20-minute runtime, with not really much of an emphasis to curveballs or calming moments, Apart from the piano at the end, which, yes, it transitions to insanity. But in this one, we see possibly the biggest dragging of ideas. And I don't mean this as a negative, as I believe many of those segments get the appropriate time to shine without becoming grating or feeling lackluster. To the casual metal listener, this more experimental fusion of noise, sludge, and electronics can be a bit challenging, and while the labeling of doom and stoner metal is not completely inaccurate, it is far from the bigger picture and can come off as deceiving. The album is also not holding back on instantly breaking your immersion with abrupt cuts and surprises, but not getting to the extent on becoming tiresome. There is consistency with each idea it provides, it gives it room to breathe and present itself. It's quite a special hidden gem whose story of how it ended up in my collection gives it some extra value, for sure, but still surprised how no one seems to talk about this, considering that I sincerely find this as one of the most compelling metal works of the 2000s, and that's why I consider the Sontaran Experiment to be an essential. Let me know your thoughts of this album down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.